Hi students, welcome to Walking with Christ Through World Literature, this section on modernism. Modernist literature can seem very bleak. There's so much darkness and anxiety, fear and terror in the things that we read in this unit. And yet, some people have said that from a spiritual perspective, modernism is deeply edifying. For people your age to look into the abyss, the deep, endless pit of meaninglessness at the heart of most of our world's values, is something that actually helps us see more clearly the very few things that are meaningful. And so when we read Conrad's Heart of Darkness, or Pirandello's 6 Characters in Search of an Author, or T.S. Eliot's masterpiece, The Wasteland, I hope that through the bleakness you see a very deeply biblical theme. It says in the book of Isaiah that God looks at us and all of our righteousness and sees it as broken pottery or filthy rags. God says to us, "My ways are so far above your ways that you can hardly understand me unless I reach out to you and speak to you." You try things, God says to us, and they fall flat. 1 in 1,000 attempts seems to partially work out. Whereas if I take an action, God says, it works. And it leads to other ends, which also work my will. I send the rain and the snow, and they water the ground, and they make the crops grow, and people harvest them and make bread. With one action on God's part, multiple ends succeed and work. And God says, that's the way that my word is going into the world. I send forth my word, and it doesn't return to me until it's done the things that I've sent it to do. So the edifying part of modernist literature is to show us how, unlike God's word, all of our words are so deeply broken and corrupt. The way that we think about civilization and the way that we think about our own individual identities. The truth is that at heart, even though we would like to think we're stable and successful, we are fearful, cowering creatures, wrapped up in sick hungers, and often unable to know what's actually healthy for us, how we can escape the traps that we've put ourselves in. And yet, at an even deeper level, modernism helps us to be receptive to a more positive side of the spiritual picture, what you might say the heart of the gospel, where Jesus tells us, "Come to me, those that are broken down, weary, poor and tired and sick, exhausted, come to me and take my burden on you, because my burden is light and easy, and I will carry you, and you will find rest for your soul." In the Sermon on the Mount, think of the way that Jesus says that his kingdom is for the people that are at the end of their rope, that have run out of all the resources that this world has to offer. Think of the way that Jesus says to the self-righteous religious leaders of his day, "I haven't come for the so-called righteous people, but for the people that feel their sickness and their poverty." Modernism is kind of like sandpaper to our complacency and self-righteousness. And you'll also see flashes of a very hopeful spiritual spirit in line with the gospel that Jesus brought us. Take, for example, Rilke's poetry, where he says that God speaks to us out of the darkness. And God says to us, "Flare up like a flame." We might add, God knows where we are in the middle of all of our brokenness and poverty. And still he knows that out of that brokenness can come something beautiful and powerful in our lives. Rilke says, "Flare up like a flame and go to the very borders of your existence and cast big shadows that I can move in." Think of that. What a beautiful picture for God's work in our lives, if we're Christians, for what it means to carry on the Spirit of Christ and to do his work. We are like a flame of light in the world. And sometimes when we struggle with our faith, when we're having trouble seeing God, it's sort of like the problem of fish being unable to see the water. God is in us. His Spirit is working through us. And it's hard for us to see Him, and yet He's working through us. And as we flare up like a flame, we're casting these huge shadows, and God is moving in the shadows just beyond the border of our vision. In us, around us, surrounding us, God is working all things for good. And so I hope that the bleakness of modernist literature just helps bring out the contrast of the few things that are bright and true and good for you. And if you see lots of struggles with faith in this unit's literature, I hope that you will also take to heart the more important struggle that I think is healthy for anyone who wants to follow Christ. Not that we doubt God, but that we learn how to doubt ourselves appropriately. Thank you for listening.